Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here again at Digit. Thank you very much for the invite. And many of you have probably may have seen me speak at other events around Scotland. But what I'm doing today is something I have never done before, and I'm really excited about it. What my intent here today, this morning, is to be able to project and to speculate about the future, and about the future of zero trust. And so this is purely a future forecasting. I'm going to explain how I came up with my projections, how I think things are going to go, and what the reasons are for getting there. But the whole point and the whole reason to be able to do this is because zero trust is so new. And it's so undefined, and there's a lot of swirling speculation around it, that as organizations are trying to figure out what they want to do, what their strategy is going to be, how they're going to approach it, where they need to invest, there's a lot of uncertainty. So what I'm trying to do with this talk is to try to narrow that uncertainty down to a little bit, so that you can start investing wisely and you can start making the changes in your architecture that make sense for you, given what's going to be what I see as the probable future. All right, so this is probable future telling, crystal ball gazing, take it for what it's worth, and if you have a different opinion, I'd love to hear it after. All right, so I've got a lot that I want to be able to cover today. There's a lot of future to cram in to talk. I'm going to go over very briefly what zero trust is. This isn't a primer on zero trust. I'm assuming you know what zero trust is, or at least have a little bit of an understanding. The direction of travel, the history of zero trust, where we are today and how we got to today. The big problems for zero trust today, why we're struggling right now. The near-term evolutions, where I think things are going over the next 1 or 2 years and the changes we're going to see. My model for predicting the future, what I think the future is going to look like, and then the future problems that I see and their probable solutions. And it's those things which will help you focus and gauge your investments and your architecture and your design moving forward so that you know what to do. All right? So, first off, what is zero trust? My premise for zero trust is that zero trust is not a technology. It's not a thing. It's not something you can buy. It's an approach. It's a philosophy. It's a strategy. And there is no zero trust tick box. Right? There's nothing we can say, tick, we have now accomplished zero trust, we're done, we're now moving on to something new. Zero trust is an approach, like Italian cooking is for cooking. It's a style of cooking, it's a way of cooking, it's a philosophy, it's an approach, a mindset to cooking. Or defensive driving, right? It's not something that you accomplish, it's something that you do, it's a skill, it's something that moves on. Zero trust takes you from can you do something, a permissions-based approach, to should you. You may have the permissions to do it. You may be allowed to do it, but should you do what you're allowed to do? And that's what zero trust starts to bring to this whole notion. And because we are looking at a perimeter-less IT infrastructure that we need to protect, then just simply access to the perimeter isn't going to cut it anymore. We need to have a lot more visibility into what's going on, so we need to have different tools, different approaches, and different mindsets. If you were here last Digit Expo and my exploration of zero trust, I didn't call it zero trust, you'll recognize this image, which is an idea where we have people, devices, and workloads, robotics, machines, clouds that are wanting to access systems, databases, other systems, other cloud systems. And all of this creates a feedback loop, both from the left side and the right side, into a policy engine and enforcement point, which makes that decision, that's great, you can, but should you? Should you now? Should you in this state? Should you in this particular context? Yes or no? And you have information coming from what's being accessed, which helps inform the policy enforcement and inspection point. If you're looking for a more official diagram, you will have the NIST diagram, which some of you may be familiar with, which splits things. This line is very important and is the entire point, where you have a data plane, the stuff, connecting to the other stuff, and a whole bunch of information being gathered into a policy engine or a policy enforcement point, and the engine and enforcement point gets a ton of third-party information, and a ton of internal information in order to make the decision. I have gone at light speed. For how many of you is this a new idea? New idea? Or am I preaching to the choir? I need to know because I need to know how slow I need to go. Okay, we got a hand. I see that hand. Is there another? All right, okay. I'm assuming you know, assuming you came to this talk, you self-selected yourself for this talk, so you sort of have some understanding of zero trust. All right, so that's why I've gone through light speed on this. Okay, so this is really, really important. There's a couple other pieces in here that are really important, and I'll be harping on them throughout the talk. One, the amount of data, both internally, externally, and the data from the various the things, the nodes themselves. There's a lot of data. In addition to that data, there's a lot of API functionality that needs to be collected in order to do something. The policy engine can make the decision, but then it needs to do something. It needs that functionality. So you'll hear me talk about those quite a lot, because those are the foundations for where I see zero trust is going. Direction of travel, the history of zero trust. We're dealing with a relatively new concept and a relatively new term. 2009, Google produced its BeyondCorp paper. A year later, or Forrester likes to compete with Google in this one, they came up with the zero trust as a term for IT security. The phrase was actually coined in 2005 by a University of Stirling professor in his paper on quantifying trust. Then the idea sparked a lot of inspiration. And then 2018, NIST came up with their initial paper. 2019, NCIC officially recommends a zero trust philosophy for all new IT networks. So this was big, this was huge, this was a big endorsement of this entire process. And then, 2020, global pandemic forces a perimeter-less IT architecture. No one's in the office. If no one's in the office, protecting the office isn't going to do you any good. You need to protect everybody who's not in the office. So now zero trust becomes extremely interesting because it provides you that foundation for moving forward. So much so that the next year, US executive order enshrines zero trust, saying that the government and DoD in the US now needs to prove that they're moving towards a zero trust philosophy. Singapore does the same thing later that year. And then, everybody gets to go back home. Everybody gets to go back to the office. Isn't that awesome? A lot of people are really thrilled with this idea. Most people aren't. So where IT managers and IT strategists were saying, well, we just need to hunker down and survive the pandemic, they're now having to come up with this idea that, nope, this perimeter-less approach is now the norm. And what are we going to do about it? And just a couple months ago, NIST added a new zero trust paper. It's in draft form on implementing zero trust. So this is new guidance and new approach. It's still in its draft form. It's a work in progress. So this is where we are now. This is the direction of travel. And this is relatively new. The perimeter-lessness is new. The zero trust concept is new. Everything is new, and everyone's still figuring it out. But there is a lot of momentum behind this entire idea. Okta survey this year, August of this year, if I remember, yeah. 45% of EMEA organizations currently have a defined zero trust initiative. 53% of organizations are planning to implement within the next year or two. Okay, a lot of groundswell for this. Next, World Economic Forum report saying that 80% of C-suite leaders consider zero trust to be important. And their estimation of the zero trust market is going to double in 5 years, right? Huge momentum behind this entire thing. All of this support, all of this momentum is going to mean change. And the Gartner report, which came out in July, I love this one, 60% of organizations will embrace zero trust as the starting point for security by 2025, 2 years' time. More than half will fail to realize the benefits. Zero trust, it's a great idea. It's a fantastic idea. It's what you need for a perimeter-less environment. Please sit, please. I will pause so that you can find a seat because I am going to be talking for a while and you can't stand that long. It's a great idea. The need is there. The need is huge. But more than half are going to fail to realize the benefits of doing so. Why? That is my question. There are some well-known reasons why, and there's some well-known roadblocks and hurdles that are in place that we need to get over and we will get over. These aren't blockers, these are challenges that we will get over. One, zero trust is conceptual. It's an idea, it's an approach, it's a strategy, it's a philosophy, and it can be defined in too many different ways. The existing standards, the ones from NIST, papers from other organizations, they're new and they're relatively high level. They're not really well defined. They're at a really high level of strategy, and those can be interpreted in different ways. Vendors are also redefining the term zero trust, and tools are just starting their innovation cycle. Okay? So it's a little bit like the proverb of a bunch of blind people touching an elephant, and everyone's touching a different part of the elephant, and they're asking, what is it? If you're touching an ear, you think it's one thing. If you're touching a tail, you think it's something else. Touching the leg, you think it's a different type of animal. So what we need to understand, though, is because zero trust is a concept, and IT is big, that zero trust does have different meanings and different applications depending upon what you're trying to solve. And we need to recognize that. We need to be okay with that. There isn't one single answer to answer all the questions. We need to realize we're tackling an elephant, and we're tackling it from different vectors. And we have different needs in doing so. All right. The innovation cycle is one of the things I'm going to tackle in depth here today, and what that means and what that cycle is going to result in for future developments for zero trust. But before we do that, the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen next year? What's Jordan's predictions for 2023? I've never done this before. I never do predictions. Now, remember, this is the NIST diagram. Remember that everything is based on this idea of being able to get telemetry, a lot of data of what's happening externally to the organization, internally to the organization, and the stuff that's accessing the other stuff. All of that needs to be providing a lot of telemetry. The telemetry needs to be processed by the engine, which results in actions by an API on the stuff on the stuff. So the decision needs to be made back to the user, to the device, to the workflow, to the cloud engine, to the VM, whatever, and it needs to go to the network and the perimeter and the database and the server and the service and all that stuff. So this needs to access this and this based on a flood of data. Keeping that in mind then, what I think are the near-term predictions. By the way, I was at Cisco CCIE in 2001. And I got out of the Cisco CCIE because they started coming up with, they came up with the idea of software-defined networking. And this whole idea of software-defined networking was brand new, and I thought, oh great, my job's dead, right? I'm going to be replaced with a simple shell script, right? Because that's all it's going to be. I was 20 years a little early on that, so take that in mind, take that in consideration as I talk about my predictions, all right? I might be a few years early on some of these. All right. ZTNA to replace VPN. This is a prediction made by Gartner by 2025. 70% of new remote access deployments will rely on ZTNA rather than VPN. This is a fantastic idea because VPN is point-to-point. VPN is point-to-point. You connect to here, you get connected there, and then you get access to the network on the other side of that point. That's a VPN. ZTNA is multi-point. You can access anything. You can access all kinds of things. So because of that, and because we no longer have a perimeter, a ZTNA approach makes a lot more sense than a VPN. A lot of organizations are just going to start migrating. And the zero trust network access, well, let's start dropping the N. It's now going to be zero trust access because we're not just accessing a network, we're accessing everything. Services, microservices, other things all over the world that we might not have control over, but we still want to be able to provide security for. Okay, so ZTNA will replace VPN. That's already happening now. There's a huge, huge push for that. WAAP to replace WAF. WAAP, Web Application and API Protection. okay, as opposed to a web application firewall. Web application firewall works great if you have a service with a perimeter and a point where you can put in a firewall. Modern websites and modern services don't work that way. They have APIs and microservices and third parties, and it's a huge mesh. You can't use a WAF for a mesh. You can use WAAP. There's a lot of development that's happening on this particular technology right now, and that will continue to grow. Next, near-term prediction, IoT zero trust will grow very, very quickly. Everybody hates IoT because it's some random developer created this random hardware device that does random things, and who knows what extra libraries or firmware was also grabbed from some open source development, and now there's a backdoor that's now piping all your data and providing access to your network to some foreign nation, right? That's the problem. Well, the good news is zero trust is the perfect solution. Now, if you can adjust and protect your IoT with either a wrapper or a network that involves IoT, or embed zero trust agents in the firmware on these devices before they get produced, right? Not afterwards. It has to be in the before time. Then it becomes a lot easier than to have random IoT in a network, and you're still okay because it's been protected with a zero trust approach and zero trust tools. 5G software-defined networking and IoT, we're talking about smart cities, we're talking about large-scale, huge deployments, physical deployments, oil and gas. This also becomes interesting. Zero trust would be a core enabler to make sure that can happen safely. We have all kinds of ideas for all kinds of things that we can change a city or a large infrastructure or a large plant, but we have trouble doing it safely. So that's holding us back. By having that zero trust as that foundation, we'll have an enabler. And marketing is a non-technical prediction. Marketing is going to go wild with the phrase to indicate better than zero. So zero plus trust, or zero trust plus, or 0+1, or what? I can't even predict. But we're going to have all kinds of weird things going on with better than zero happening. People don't like the term zero trust. I understand why. I'm not a big fan of it either. It's just the accepted phrase. Once NIST writes it on a paper, it's enshrined. There's nothing you can do about it. And we're going to have zero trust ready labeled solutions. These are products and services that are going to produce the telemetry and expose the API that you can plug into your zero trust framework and fabric in order for it to participate in with everything else. Okay? So we're going to start seeing that happening soon too. And a collaboration of zero trust security microservices. Everyone's going to be coming up with all kinds of solutions, all kinds of things that are going to do some really helpful, good things, but they solve one problem. So what they need to do is they need to become like Lego bricks, where they can start connecting together within that framework for that to work. And so you're going to end up with zero trust ready, security microservice, and a common control language will emerge in order to flow all that together. This is what we're starting to see already. All right. Should I take a break? Should I pass out treats, coffee, water? Where am I on time? Fantastic. The future. How many of you have heard of Wardley mapping? Wardley mapping? Raise your hand. Wardley mapping? Fantastic. Great. I get to teach Wardley mapping from scratch in 2 minutes. Right. Wardley mapping. Wardley mapping is the idea that things progress, things evolve in terms of a novel state to a well-established commodity state. Right? So you start off with something that was brand new, no one's ever made before. You got the first thing, and people are trying to figure out, does it work, does it not work, how does it work, how does it improve? And then this line is this line where it breaches the proof of concept. It's proven that it works. And then it gets into this custom field. So now it works, it's been proven, but it's really, really custom. And then as it progresses and matures and evolves, it reaches this line where it gets defined. Now we have a definition where it can be applied in multiple different areas. It no longer needs to be custom. It's now in the product line, product or service line, a defined product, defined service. And as that matures and progresses, it reaches this line where it gets to be the standard line, and it becomes a commodity. Electricity went through this entire cycle. You had the first person trying to create electricity, right? And it did whatever it did, and who knows, but okay, well, I hurt myself, so obviously it works. And then it gets to custom-built applications. So we're going to provide electricity for this one thing in this one environment, and someone has to sit there and tend it all day long. And then they said, well, this is too much work. We need to refine it. We need to make sure it works all the time for anybody. And then it becomes a product, right? So now we have generators. Now we have batteries. Now we have the first generators and the first batteries for things that happen. The first power generations, plants, whatever. And that starts getting defined. And then electricity reaches this line. It's now a standard. Now, we don't care. It's invisible. We plug something into the wall. We plug a battery in, and we don't care anymore. It just does its thing. So one of the side things, the reason why this is three-dimensional, is that this line also includes visibility. How visible, how much work does it take, how much focus does it take to deal with this thing? Okay? So it goes from really, really visible to invisible, right, down here in the corner. And that's how that works. So you have electricity, which is completely visible. We don't even care. We don't care about the standards. We don't care what we have. All right, a little bit more technical to bring things back. Computers. The Babbage difference engine, right? He worked it up, he designed it, but he had no clue whether or not it worked. It was half finished when he died, and other people finished it for him. So it was really, really custom, which meant it required a lot of focus to make sure it worked and provide the value that it needed to provide. Then we had IBM, who had computers which were custom built, custom made for the purposes for which they were needed. And then you had operators using the computer for the company. Now, the company had a lot of focus on that computer, but the operators of that computer could do things for the rest of the company. So it decreased in visibility a little bit. And then we have desktops, right? Now we have something that can do anything, and it's now ubiquitous, and some say that the desktop computer is more commodity, right? Right? We don't care. We don't care if it's I'm very sorry, vendors. I'm very, very sorry, vendors. I'm very sorry. Please forgive me. We don't care if it's a Dell or an HP, right? We just want a computer, right? More than that, we just want a browser. We just want to be able to run the programs. We don't even care about the computer anymore. I remember when we cared whether it was a 486 or a 386. I'm that old. We don't even care what the processor in it is anymore, right? We don't care. Ultimately, we don't care how much RAM it's in after we purchased it. After we purchased it, it's got 8 gigs. Whoop-de-doo, I don't even remember how much is in my laptop, right? So these things become invisible. And then, once we got this idea that we could process information, then we ended up with the cloud. Now the computer's gone away. Now we have this invisible, completely invisible processing power out there we just tap into, like a plug in a wall. But here's the thing about Wardley mapping. This is not the end of the story. This line is not the end of the story. This line results in new innovation. We end up with this as a platform which results in new innovations, new things to test, new things to try, and those go through those evolutions. So what happens at this particular point is a fracturing. This commodity thing now explodes into a million different things, which we are seeing, right? We're seeing so many different ways. Sorry, it's way down south here. I'm seeing people moving their heads. We're seeing so many different ways of utilizing the cloud in new and innovative ways that these things are becoming their own innovation cycle. All right, that was a segue. Zero trust. Zero trust is right on this line, I believe, on this custom-built notion, because you can make your own zero trust in policy engines and enforcement engines. You can do that. You can totally build it yourself. That would be a lot of work, but you could do it. And product. We're right on this level. And as this gets defined, we will start to see a rapid evolution because we need zero trust to be invisible. We need it to fade in the background to do its work. We don't want to have to manage. We don't want our users to manage zero trust. All right. It's future of zero trust. Here's the big predictions. Here's my crystal ball. All right? Keep the Wardley mapping in mind, that things will progress as standards come, and APIs and telemetries. All right? Policy engine enforcement federations. Currently, we have multiple zones of control with our own policy engines and enforcement points. We have cloud, we have internal, we've got VPN, we've got all these different things, and they all can be zero trusted, right? Step one in this evolution, vendors are going to start to create monolithic policy engines to fill the gaps, right? We're already seeing this. We already have vendors creating big policy engines where you can plug in anything. Microsoft's doing it, Cisco's doing it, where you can solve all the things with one policy engine. But with that monolithic nature, you're going to have an explosion right after. It's going to fracture. Step two, you're going to have competing vendors will create different products, policy enforcement products, which is going to create confusion. You're going to have Mac, Windows, Linux. You're going to have that whole thing going on. And then the next step is going to be like we had for the cloud. It's now just going to be a thing in the background. Step three, you're going to have a policy engine coordination standard. A platform will emerge where you can now plug in whatever it is you need to plug in, including other different types of policy enforcement engines, right? You don't need monolithic. You just need a platform to tie it all together. Prediction number 2. Yep. Prediction number 2, hybrid cloud security improvements. Currently, we have separate zones of control. We have different types of clouds. We have different types of situations, including on-premise and public cloud. And it's difficult to secure holistically. It's really, really difficult to secure that. Step one, we're going to start seeing dedicated hybrid cloud zero trust solutions. So if you've got this on-prem and you're on this cloud, we can protect that. And that's more protection, but it's still not holistic, right? Step two, you're now going to have cloud-ingrained zero-trust products from cloud providers that are going to start reaching down into that private cloud and your on-prem stuff. And it's going to be provided by your cloud provider, just part of their infrastructure. That's going to be there. Oh, by the way, why hybrid cloud is a focus? Because a lot of businesses, especially large ones, are pulling back from the cloud. There's a lot of stuff that they're leaving in the cloud, but they're bringing a lot back on-prem. This is now becoming an issue. Step three, meta layers of zero trust services will then start covering both. Now we start having this platform approach where now you can plug in on-prem, cloud, other services, microkernels, everything you can now plug in no matter where it is physically. So hybrid cloud security improvements will come. Embedded metadata in data for enforcement. Currently, what we have now for our files and the data that we produce, files use a permission and classifications approach for DLP, right? We have sensitive, non-sensitive, whatever, public, non-public. And we can then, with that flag, then have enforcement points on email or firewalls and then make decisions on those files going through. Really, really crude and has problems working really, really well. With a zero trust approach, what if the files themselves provided telemetry? If the files themselves, if the data themselves, if, I understand the problems here, if the database row itself produced telemetry, then you could then track that telemetry no matter where it flowed, even if that data was unstructured. You're going to, now this is, we might be 10 years, 15 years down the line on this one, but what we're going to start to see is distributed policy engines allowing for deeper tracking and enforcement. So a little bit more tagging, a little bit more metadata, embedding more of that metadata so we can track it. Step two, policy engines will start to emerge to augment and then evolve DLP solutions. So now we're going to add a little bit more visibility and more reach, into the entire DLP process. And then DLP, in my prediction, is actually going to go away. It's going to disappear. And wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if DLP disappeared? Actually did its work without needing to have all that focus. I'd love that. Individual file and data zero trust solutions will be absorbed into the natural flow of how data is processed and transferred within an organization. Admittedly, I think we're 20 years down the line from this one. We're ways away, I think. Okay? But we're going to start to see real DLP because now we have a zero trust framework and fabric and understanding to actually make it work the way we really need it to work. And zero trust in the metaverse. Just joking, I'm not even going to go there. Right. Yes, I am keeping very close tabs. Problems. All of these innovations, all of these bright new futures that I'm seeing also come with their own problems. The Wardley mapping and the innovation cycle helps us to map out what those problems can be as well. This is a very, very useful exercise. Last mile pushback. It has to do mostly with BYOD. The zero trust principle is to try and push as much policy enforcement as close to the edge as possible, which means that we need to be able to provide that enforcement as close to the end user's device as possible. That's fine if you control the end user's device. What if you don't? We have, and we're going to see more zero trust agents. We have EDR, XDR, all of these things, which are core and part and parcel and really important to zero trust. You're seeing self-healing capabilities so that you don't need to have all this information go to a central point, figure out, yeah, that's bad, and then send all that information back to actually do something about it. What if all that decision was made at that point? That's great. And we're going to start seeing BIOS agents, firmware agents installed into the device itself to be that ZT-ready, that zero trust-ready product that provides telemetry and the APIs right at the firmware level. We're going to see that. The challenge. This whole thing is easier when you control the edge, when you control those end devices. But people will resist the intrusion. They're doing it now. They don't want to have the MFA app on their phone. Right? You're spying on my phone. No, it's just a clock. It's just producing a code every 30 seconds. It's a clock. That's it. They don't want to do that. So if they don't want to have that, there's going to be huge pushback on installing a zero trust agent or an EDR agent on their personal phone. That's just going to be the reality. They're going to push back on this. It'd be great if we could force it. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't see success there. What I do see success in is abstracting the connection from BYOD. What if we didn't care? What if we didn't care what the device was they were using? What if they used XP? Service Pack 1, XP, Service Pack 1. What if we didn't care? Wouldn't that be great? I believe we can totally do that. There's a few different ways of doing this. One, remote browser isolation is a technology where you aren't using your browser or your browser is completely encased in something else in order to do the connection. So you have complete security and protection from whatever you're connecting to. Remote browser isolation, reality right now, today, totally, we've got lots of products. There's something, I love remote browser isolation. I think it's great. Secure remote access. So instead of VPN, what if you could totally abstract the entire connection like a Bastion host, but like a Bastion host on steroids? So that you're not connecting to the thing you're connecting to, you're connecting to a secure thing that totally separates your connection to the thing you need to connect to. That would be great. And then you mix all of this with SASE and ZTNA. So that no matter where you are, no matter what you're using, even if you're using XP Service Pack 1, you're connecting, you're fine. Okay? So last mile pushback is real. We're not going to solve that. I think we solve that by sidestepping it, literally, by abstracting the connection that we need to make. Tuning Discord. Not the app Discord, but the effect of Discord. The current custom nature, because as you remember, we're on that edge between a custom and product for zero trust and their products and services. The current custom nature of policy enforcement will require tuning. It just will. Just like firewall rules, just like a WAF rule does, just like all these things, there's going to be all of this tuning that needs to happen. There's not enough people. They're just not. There's not enough people now to do the things we're asking them to do. Now we're going to ask them to understand and tune policy engines in a zero trust platform that's brand new. That's going to be tough. The solution to this, if we're going to start to see established standards, okay, to make sure that everything's done the same way. Standardize what you can. Not everything can be standardized because there's too much complexity. And then we'll start to see AI, machine learning, thank you, auto-tuning of those rules to make sense. And yeah, we're going to see some success there, and that's going to do some heavy lifting to fill in the rest of the gaps. And yes, the auto-tuning will work as well as Singer's auto-tuning at the beginning, but it will improve over time. And then what we'll start to see, and what will happen immediately, is managed zero trust policy engine providers, where people just know they consolidate all that expertise into a single place where they can do that for you. So instead of AI doing it, you have a human doing it, a trained human. So I think a bunch of these solutions are going to start coming together to make this possible. You're not going to be able to do it yourself, frankly. I don't think that's going to be possible. You're going to need to get outside help, even if it's robotic. Okay? Compliance complexity. Ooh, boy. Already starting to see this kick in. Zero trust breaks your traditional models. You have compliance that is built on the traditional models. Now you've put in all this investment, you've put in all this work to zero trust all the things, and now you're no longer compliant. So now you have to make the zero trust look compliant, or have split things, or have two sets of books for the auditors to make it look like you're compliant and secure. So you're going to have splits across the compliance spectrum. One, you're going to have more deterministic and technically defined requirements, right? Like Cyber Essentials, right? Do this. Thou must do this, A, B, and C. Oops, pardon me. It's easy to understand, and it's easy to enforce. It's just not always 100% applicable. So then you're going to end up with broad-based, undefined requirements, which are broadly applicable, but difficult to enforce, because you can interpret it any way you want, right? Do this. Yeah, sure, we did that. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, right? And you can't say boo. The auditors can't say boo because it technically complies. We'll also start to see coalescing into industry-based collectives of compliance, because different industries can standardize on certain things. That's possible. So you're going to start to see more of this coalition. So broad-based, everybody do this. You're going to see oil and gas do this, manufacturing do this, services do this, SaaS developers do this. Okay? And my big prediction, cyber insurance will lead the compliance direction. Why? Because of the telemetry and APIs, which allow us to do modeling. You can now mathematically model the security of your network quantitatively. This becomes a possibility. So because you've got that, now you have your assurance adjusters and your, not adjudicators, not adjusters, actuaries, now actually creating the model, saying, yes, thou shalt do this, because you can, and we can measure it quantitatively. That's pretty cool. So they're going to lead that process, and then modeling will form the basis of cybersecurity investment. Once you can model it, it then disappears. It then falls off this edge. You remember from the previous, falls off this edge, and now that you've got a model, now you start building on top of that model for new security things. 20 years. That's not a tomorrow thing. That's going to be a 20 years thing. But we have the ability to mathematically model. All right, attacks on zero trust. Yep, almost done. Ooh. I am done. Attacks on zero trust. New things, super complex. We don't know how the attackers are going to attack. Frankly, we don't, which means we have to be agile enough to be able to adjust as we go. That is the short message for this slide. We don't know. We can't trust that, ooh, we've solved all the problems. No, we've solved the existing problems. We'll create new ones. Just new ones will be created. And we just have to be aware of that, including direct attacks on policy engine enforcement points, policy engine data poisoning, complexity exploitation, and simply denial of service attacks. Let's just throw a denial of service attack at the policy engine now, no one can do anything. So what are the takeaways? Hit my cue. Takeaways to the future. Telemetries and API on everything with policy engines to coordinate. All this extra data and functionality offers new opportunities, not only for innovators, but for you as organizations securing your own people and your infrastructure. Don't judge zero trust based on today's proof of concept zero trust solutions. We're in an innovation cycle that is going to very quickly change. So don't say, that zero trust stuff is crap because I saw this one thing and it was crap. Well, yeah, it probably was crap. But that doesn't mean that the entire process is going to stay that way. And remember, we're looking at an elephant. Make sure you take the elephant in as a whole. Invest in your security and your architecture and your strategy with an eye to quick evolution, because things are going to change fast. Expect to replace your initial zero trust solutions. Right? You're going to put something in place to solve a problem now, and as things evolve, you're going to want to replace that with something better, something more mature, something that is further along with the Wardley innovation curve. Okay? And start with your high-risk areas. Solve your high-risk problems now, because you can. You absolutely can. So don't wait for the future, because that's going to be disastrous. Don't wait for the future. Solve what you can now, but understand that it's a shifting environment and a shifting landscape, and things will improve rapidly, and build with this understanding that you need to build your telemetry and APIs. And then from there, that's your foundation for all of the other individual bits and pieces that you need to plug in. Thank you very much.
Use your time for questions. Does anybody have a quick question before we clear the room for Jordan? I'm sure you'll be around all day.
I will be around for most of the day. Depends on how long my leg holds up. But I'm at the barrier booth downstairs on the exhibition floor as well, or just tackle me. Please don't tackle me in the hallway, and happily talk about the future, your existing problems, where I got it wrong. Happily talk about all of that stuff. So thank you very much.